My name is Talia, and this is the story of the day my family decided I didn't belong in the home where I grew up. It started when Dad told me, "You were a mistake, so why should we waste a room on you?" He didn't sound angry, he sounded sure, and that made it hurt even more. Mom was standing nearby, but she wouldn't look at me. It was like she thought if she didn't look at me, she wasn't part of what was happening. My brother stood behind them, quiet, but I could see he was happy. The look on his face told me he had been waiting for this moment. Dad pointed at the front door. There was no talk, no warning, no chance for me to explain. I held my backpack in one hand and walked out because staying would have broken me in ways I could never fix. The door closed the second I stepped outside, and I heard the lock click before I could even turn around. That sound stayed in my chest longer than any yelling ever could. I stood on the walkway, confused, scared, and strangely relieved because for the first time I realized that the love I had been hoping for from them might never have been there at all. I didn't know where I would sleep that night, but I knew I wasn't going to look back. What I didn't know was that everything they believed about power and who owned what would fall apart with just one phone call. And the truth about who the house really belonged to would change everything. Before we keep going, tell me what time it is, where you are, and which city you're watching from. I love seeing all the places the story can reach. I grew up in a house where what was right and wrong changed every time Dad's mood changed or Mom chose to stay quiet instead of standing up for me when Logan and I fought. I learned early that rules didn't work the same way for both of us, and that created an unspoken order that shaped everything inside those walls. My brother Logan always seemed to get out of trouble, no matter how serious it was. And the moment he felt blame coming his way, he changed the story so fast that even the truth felt shaky. Every time he lied, the story got twisted until it landed on me, and I was often shocked at how easily my parents believed whatever version worked for them. There were days when Logan crossed lines that would have gotten me punished without a question. He skipped chores, ignored curfews, and argued with teachers. But Dad still gave him comfort while demanding I obey everything. I watched Logan break a neighbor's garden light once, and he said I had bumped into it while riding my bike. Dad wouldn't listen to my explanation and lectured me for not respecting property, even though I had been inside the house all afternoon. His voice with me was sharp and annoyed, but his voice softened whenever Logan spoke, which made it clear I was expected to take responsibility for both of us. Mom rarely stopped moments like that. She stood at the edge of every fight with her hands folded, like staying neutral made her innocent. Her tries at making peace sounded more like quiet giving up, and I often wondered if she was afraid to disagree with Dad or just liked harmony more than honesty. The few times I looked to her for help, she looked away and let the silence be the final answer. Her staying quiet shaped the household more than her words ever could because it reminded me that I was alone whenever things got tense. There were small ways my place in the family got smaller over time. When Logan wanted the bigger bedroom, Dad moved my stuff without warning and told me it made sense. When there was one ticket left to a school trip, he said Logan deserved it because he had been through more stress. When I won an award for an essay, the certificate disappeared from the fridge in a day, replaced by a drawing Logan made in 5 minutes. Each change chipped away at my confidence until it felt normal to expect less than everyone else, which made it harder to understand why I kept hoping things would change. The breaking point came during a weekend when Logan lost his phone at a friend's house and said I had taken it because I was jealous. Dad acted before asking a single question. He stormed into my room, demanded an explanation, and wouldn't believe me, even when Logan found the phone buried under the seat of his friend's car. Instead of admitting the mistake, Dad said my attitude had caused unnecessary problems and said he was tired of dealing with my so-called behavior. His frustration grew into something heavier, and he told Mom that getting rid of me would bring peace back into the family. I stood in the hallway while they talked like I was a problem instead of their daughter. Logan watched from behind the railing with the same smug look he had the day the door closed behind me. Dad didn't wait for my reaction. He just pointed toward the exit and said I would leave by the end of the afternoon, which left no room for arguing. Even though fear rose in my throat, there was also a quiet understanding that this decision had been forming long before that day, built by years of unfair treatment and silent approval. I realized that the moment Dad gave Logan everything I lost, this ending had always been coming. The next morning, I stood in front of my Grandma Nora's house with my suitcase behind me, feeling the weight of everything that had fallen apart overnight settling into my chest in a way I had never felt before. When she opened the door, she looked at me long enough for worry to take over the surprise, and she stepped aside right away, like letting me stand outside any longer felt wrong to her. Nora guided me to the nearest chair and sat across from me, watching my hand shake a little, even though I kept trying to hide it. She asked if I was hurt, if I had slept at all, and if I needed anything to eat. I shook my head because every question made me realize I hadn't heard concern spoken with that kind of care in what felt like years. Her voice got softer, but her face got sharper as she leaned forward. "Tell me what happened. Talia." I took a slow breath and tried to steady my voice before I told her how everything unfolded. I repeated the exact words Dad threw at me, the ones that cut through whatever was left of my place in that house. "You were a mistake. Why waste a room on you?" I told her how Mom stayed quiet, not because she disagreed, but because she avoided taking my side in anything that involved Logan. I explained how Logan watched the whole thing with a look that showed he knew this had been building for a long time. Nora pressed her hand against her chest when she heard about the door locking behind me, and for a moment I wondered if saying the truth out loud made it heavier for both of us. She asked if I had grabbed every important document and told me to open my suitcase in case something had been left behind during the rush of leaving. When I handed her the envelope of papers I had taken with me, she unfolded each page, carefully reading every line with the sharp attention of someone who wouldn't overlook even the smallest detail. She paused when she got to a photocopy of a document about the house I had lived in my whole life. Her eyebrows came together as she reread the page, and she held it closer as if the handwriting might change if she gave it more time. When she looked at me again, her face showed both disbelief and understanding. "This signature isn't your dad's," Nora said, lowering the paper slowly. I stared at her without fully understanding what she meant. She tapped the signature line and continued, "I know this handwriting. This belongs to your grandpa. He signed this." The realization didn't hit me right away. I had grown up believing the house belonged completely to my parents, and I had never questioned it because the subject had never been open for discussion. Nora stood up with a determined look and walked toward the drawer where she kept the contact information of people she trusted for serious matters. She found the number she needed and reached for the phone without hesitation. "I need to speak with the property manager," she said in a tone that left no room for delay. While she waited for the call to connect, I sat there wondering how many truths had been hidden behind the walls of a house that had pushed me out so easily. When the person on the other end answered, Nora introduced herself and asked for detailed proof of who owned the property. Her voice held a firmness that made it clear she wouldn't stop until she got to the bottom of whatever had been hidden. After a few minutes, she ended the call and turned to me with a look that showed both determination and a bit of anger she hadn't said out loud yet. "Talia, this situation isn't what you think. There's much more underneath it." The way she said it told me that the life Dad tried to push me out of was about to change in a direction none of them were ready to face. That afternoon, Grandma called me into the living room with a seriousness that quieted every thought swirling in my mind, and I followed her with the uneasy feeling that whatever she had discovered would shift the ground beneath us once again. She sat me down before reaching for a small box she kept on a high shelf, the one she rarely touched unless something really needed her full attention. The moment she opened it, I recognized the old folders she had saved after my grandpa passed away, and seeing them pulled a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation out of me. Grandma laid several documents across the table and carefully unfolded papers that had signatures I had never seen before. She explained that my grandpa had handled his affairs with care that left little room for confusion, which made her question why there were missing records around the house recently. She thought Dad might have taken advantage of the years he controlled everything, especially since he had access to files no one else knew existed. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that her suspicions weren't just worries, but conclusions drawn from patterns she had quietly noticed for far too long. As she kept reviewing the papers, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it until I saw a notification showing that Logan had posted something online. The caption made it sound like I had stormed out in anger, followed by comments saying I had always been unstable. The twisting of the truth hit me harder than I expected, especially because it came from someone who had watched me get thrown out. Logan knew exactly what he was doing, and his lies spread quickly. I reached out to my friend Ava, who was the only person I trusted to check if the post was getting shared beyond our usual circles. She responded within minutes and said that several people had already shared Logan's version of the story. Her message helped me see how fast wrong information could twist reality. And even though the situation hurt, I thanked her and told her I would handle the rest. I knew I couldn't lean on her for more than that because this part of my life needed to be managed within the family before it got out of control. Grandma noticed my reaction and asked to see the messages. She read them slowly, then folded her hands with a calmness that stood out against the tension rising inside me. She said that lies spread easily when people believe no one will challenge them, and she promised that we wouldn't let lies stand unopposed. Her confidence made me breathe differently, as if the air in the room had shifted from heavy to a quiet kind of strength. Without wasting time, Grandma picked up the phone and called the estate manager, Mr. Holt, who had looked after my grandpa's belongings long before Dad got involved. She introduced herself with calm authority and asked for a review of every document tied to the property where I had grown up. I watched her posture tighten slightly as she waited for his response, and something about her presence made me realize that she was prepared to face far more than fake signatures or missing files. When she ended the call, she told me that Mr. Holt would come the next morning to do a full check. The idea of facing whatever truth was behind those papers made my stomach twist. Not because I was afraid of what would happen, but because I sensed how deeply this truth could unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. Grandma reached over and placed her hand on mine. She said the truth had waited long enough, and that it was time for me to see exactly what had been hidden from me. Her voice had a strength that steadied my nerves, and for the first time since I left the house, hope settled beside the fear that had followed me everywhere. 2 days later, Mr. Holt showed up at Grandma's door, and the quiet determination on his face made it clear that he had come with more than a routine update. I stood beside Grandma while he set his briefcase on the low table and explained that he had spent the past 48 hours reviewing every document tied to my grandfather's belongings, including the property records that had been changed over the years. His voice had calm authority when he said that the house in Nevada had never been given to Dad in any way and that the original person named in the final paperwork was me. The realization settled over me with a weight I had never felt before, because it was the first time anyone had spoken with certainty about something I had always been told didn't belong to me. Grandma listened with a seriousness that left no room for interruption, and when Mr. Holt told her that the situation required a face-to-face meeting with my parents, she agreed without hesitation. He made the call from the kitchen, and within an hour, Dad and Mom arrived with looks that shifted between confusion and irritation, as if they had been called in for something beneath their attention. Mr. Holt invited them to sit, and the moment they did, he opened a folder filled with documents that he arranged in a careful order on the table so there could be no confusion about them being real. Dad leaned back and tried to dismiss the findings by saying he had only managed the property to keep it from falling apart, but he avoided mentioning why he had never told me that I was listed as the legal owner. Mom rested her hands on her lap and looked away each time Mr. Holt asked if she had known about any of the changes made after my grandfather passed. Her silence circled the room like a heavy fog because it suggested more than she was willing to say out loud. Mr. Holt stayed calm, explaining each page with patience, and the more he spoke, the more Dad's confidence shook as he realized that every excuse he tried to give was proved wrong by dates, signatures, and official statements. Logan arrived moments later, called by Dad, and had the same careless attitude he had shown online. Mr. Holt spoke to him directly and said that the false accusations he had spread needed to be taken down immediately because they interfered with an active property matter. Logan tried to argue that he had only repeated what he thought was true, but Grandma interrupted with a firmness that cut through the tension when she said that repeating lies didn't free anyone from responsibility. Logan's eyes shifted downward in a way I had rarely seen, and he finally admitted that the live stream had been exaggerated. He agreed to delete it, though you could hear the reluctance in each word. The meeting moved forward with Mr. Holt giving a summary of what would happen next, explaining that the Nevada property would be officially transferred into my name once the last steps were completed. Dad protested again, but his arguments no longer sounded certain and instead felt like broken pieces of excuses that fell apart as soon as they were spoken. Mom kept distancing herself from the conversation. But there was a moment when her eyes met mine, and I couldn't tell if she felt guilt or just discomfort from being forced to face the truth. As the discussion came to a close, Mr. Holt handed me a copy of the verified documents and told me to keep them safe until the transition was finalized. My hands trembled a little when I took them, and for the first time since being pushed out of my own home, a small sense of stability found its way into my chest. The room stayed silent after Mr. Holt left, and even though no apology came from Dad, Mom, or Logan, their silence held the acknowledgement they refused to say out loud. When Grandma placed her hand on my shoulder, I felt the first quiet rise of hope. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, but it was steady enough to remind me that the truth had finally begun to surface, and for once, the ground beneath me felt like it belonged to me instead of shifting under someone else's control. The next morning brought an uneasy quiet into the house, and I barely had time to gather my thoughts when Dad showed up unannounced at Grandma's front door without even trying to hide the impatience on his face. He stepped inside before she could properly welcome him, acting as if he had every right to take back control over a situation that had slipped through his fingers. His eyes moved across the room with the kind of confidence he always wore whenever he believed he could talk his way out of trouble. "I came to clear up this misunderstanding before it becomes something bigger," he said with a voice that tried to sound calm despite the irritation weighing it down. He turned toward Grandma, trying to soften her stance, saying that the whole issue had been blown out of proportion by people who didn't understand how families sometimes argued. He spoke as if the years of neglect could be brushed away by a convenient explanation. Grandma watched him with a steady look that showed none of the exhaustion she felt from everything she had learned over the past few days. "You stood by and let things happen to her that no parent should ever let happen," she said, refusing to budge even slightly. "You pushed her aside every time she needed you. And now you want me to forget all of that because it's easier for you." Dad took a slow breath as though preparing a careful response, but his attention flicked toward me when he realized I was standing near the hallway, and his patience quickly thinned. "You could have talked to me instead of running here and turning everyone against me," he said with the kind of confidence that made my chest tighten. His voice rose, just enough to show the frustration hiding beneath his calm exterior. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go," I replied, holding his gaze even though my stomach felt heavy. "I didn't turn anyone against you. I just told the truth about how I was treated." The room stilled for a moment before Mom walked inside behind Dad with an apologetic smile that seemed rehearsed. "We didn't mean to make you feel unwanted," she said while keeping her eyes on the floor. "Things were tense at home, and we said things we didn't mean." The lack of honesty pushed through every word she tried to offer. Grandma stepped forward and stopped Mom from continuing. None of us expected her next sentence. 30 days. Then you leave the house," she said with a strength so sharp that even Dad's confidence faltered. "The property belongs to her, and if you refuse to respect that, I'll have Mr. Holt take the necessary steps to remove you." Dad opened his mouth as though searching for something to say back, but the certainty in her tone took away any power he thought he still had. Logan appeared behind them in the doorway, and when he realized Grandma had taken such a firm stance, he avoided my eyes for the first time in a long while. I stood very still, letting the weight of the moment settle into my chest. For the first time since everything started, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't victory, or revenge, or satisfaction. It was relief. Quiet, steady, undeniable relief. For the first time, someone stood beside me with complete conviction, and realizing that Grandma had chosen to protect me gave me a sense of hope I had almost forgotten. 1 week later, everything started to shift. News reached Grandma's house early that morning, and I learned that Dad had been removed from a major construction contract after an official review of his recent behavior. The company handling the project said there was a breach of professional trust, and although the announcement was brief, the consequences were clear. His removal caused an immediate money problem that neither he nor Mom had prepared for, and their attempts to fix the situation failed as the story passed quietly but steadily through the community. Mom faced a difficult adjustment once their savings started to run low. She took temporary work at a local office, a job far outside her usual comfort, and she carried herself with a noticeable heaviness each time she left for her shift. Her choices showed the pressure that had built around their lives, and I realized with a complicated mix of sympathy and distance that their situation was no longer protected by Dad's former influence. Logan faced his own consequences when the school's administration suspended his involvement in the campus leadership club. The review panel determined that his recent online behavior broke the school's standards of conduct, and the suspension came with a formal notice that left no room for negotiation. Logan kept the details quiet, but the withdrawal in his expression showed how quickly the situation had turned against him. Throughout the week, Grandma kept guiding me through the documents that confirmed my legal rights to the property in Nevada. Her calm attention steadied my nerves while she explained the importance of each signature and date, and she emphasized how important it was to keep every file organized for future reference. Her steady approach softened the tension I had carried for so long, letting me see the situation through a lens shaped by responsibility instead of fear. The final step in the process required my signature in front of a notary, and the moment I finished the last line, the reality of my inheritance settled into place. I felt a mix of disbelief and quiet strength as I took the folder holding the official transfer. Grandma watched me with a gentle pride that warmed the space between us, and she reminded me that protecting what belonged to me wasn't an act of defiance, but an act of self-respect. By the end of the week, Dad, Mom, and Logan started packing their belongings as the deadline to leave the house got closer. Their movements carried a quiet urgency, and although Dad tried to keep his composure, the shift in power was clear. Mom avoided meeting my eyes while Logan moved through each room with a silence that stood out sharply against the confidence he once wore so easily. Grandma stayed consistent in her strength. She reviewed the property documents once more and walked me through the next steps required for proper management. She taught me how to communicate with the estate office, how to keep track of finances, and how to avoid the mistakes that had allowed so much confusion to grow over the years. Her guidance wrapped around me like a steady hand, giving me the confidence to face responsibilities that had once felt overwhelming. As the week ended, I realized that the balance of power within my family had changed permanently. The change didn't erase the pain that had led us here, but it let me breathe with a clarity I had never known. For the first time, I had something that belonged entirely to me, and Grandma's unwavering presence made the path forward feel possible. A month later, I could finally look back on everything with a calm mind that no longer shook at the thought of my old house or the people who had pushed me out of it. I had settled into the place that legally belonged to me, and each day inside it felt like a quiet reminder that I had survived something far more damaging than I had once understood. I spent my mornings walking through the rooms while taking in the steady realization that my life had stepped onto a path free from the shadow of their choices. I handled the mail, answered calls about property matters, and started shaping a routine that belonged only to me. That sense of ownership grounded me in ways I had never known before, and I carried it into everything I did during those early weeks. Grandma moved in temporarily to help me navigate the legal and money details that came with the house. She never treated it like charity or an obligation, and she used every conversation to show me how independence grows when someone finally stops apologizing for existing. She coached me through paperwork, talked me through possible repairs, and showed me how to think about long-term decisions that would keep the property stable. I learned quickly because her guidance had a steady confidence that I absorbed without resistance. Meanwhile, my old family adjusted to a different reality. They had moved to a modest rental across town, and although I never visited, I heard enough through the channels that still connected us indirectly. My parents worked through the consequences of choices they had dismissed for years. That shift didn't satisfy me in a mean way, but it confirmed that I no longer lived under the weight of their judgment. I kept building my life without going back to the emotional ground where everything had once collapsed. Logan reached out after several weeks with what he said was an apology. His message went in circles around excuses before landing on a request for a conversation that he said would help both of us move forward. I read it slowly, searching for honesty, but the wording showed the same pattern I had grown up recognizing. I said no without hesitation. I no longer felt like I had to offer forgiveness that would only restart a cycle meant to pull me back into chaos. The distance protected me, and I planned to keep it that way. As the weeks went on, I tasted peace in small but steady ways. My evenings rested in silence that didn't carry tension. My mornings came without fear of raised voices or sudden rules that changed overnight. I cooked meals for myself, handled responsibilities that once felt beyond my reach, and found calm in the rhythm of a life that finally belonged to me. Grandma often reminded me that endings are rarely neat, but this one had given me room to breathe and grow. For the first time, I believed her completely. The greatest shift in my life came from understanding that distance from harmful people isn't cruelty, but clarity. It took time to accept that loyalty means nothing without respect, and that love can't grow where someone is forced to shrink. Rebuilding my life showed me how peace forms when boundaries hold steady. Healing came slowly, but it became stronger each time I chose myself instead of the expectations that once controlled me. Thank you for staying with my story until the final moment. Your time means more than you know, and I truly appreciate every listener who chooses to walk through these experiences with me. Before you leave, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there.